Make it quick, Cowboy. I won't scream, said the wounded Apache girl who was stuck under the canyon. Wes Harding had never been the kind of man who invited trouble, but trouble seemed to find him all the same, always in the quiet moments when his guard slipped, such as that morning, when he rode through the canyon, expecting nothing more than a silent trail and a few hours of solitude. Instead, he heard a sound so faint he almost thought it was the wind, until it came again. A sharp breath strangled by pain, and he immediately knew someone was hurt. Instinct pulled him toward the narrow cleft between two towering stone walls, his boots crunching over loose gravel as he scanned the shadows for the source. He found her half hidden against a fallen slab of rock, an Apache girl whose strength showed even in the way her eyes locked onto him with a warning rather than fear. Her long black hair clung to her face in dust-streaked strands, her skin marked with scratches and dried blood. Yet she held a dignity that made Wes slow his approach, hands visible and empty. When she raised a trembling arm to steady herself, she muttered in a firm, controlled voice, "Make it quick, Cowboy. I won't scream." The words surprised him not because of their boldness, but because of the absolute resolve behind them. She'd been alone long enough to accept agony without flinching. Kneeling beside her, he quickly assessed the situation. Her right leg was pinned beneath a chunk of rock that must have broken loose from the canyon wall above, trapping her in a position no one could escape without help. She had clawed at the dirt trying to free herself, and from the bruising on her arms it was clear she had been stuck for hours, maybe longer. When he asked her name, she answered simply, "Nayeli," then turned her attention back to the canyon rim as though expecting danger to appear any second. Wes understood that look. He'd worn it himself many times while riding through lawless land. He noticed the broken arrow shaft near her hip, the signs of struggle leading up to the rock slide, the torn leather strap of her skirt that suggested someone had dragged or chased her before she became trapped. Quietly, as if speaking any louder might summon more enemies, she explained that a group of bandits raided a traveling Apache camp, taking sacred belongings and leaving destruction behind. She fought back, managing to injure their leader, but that only made her a target. She had fled into the canyon hoping to lose them, only for the rock slide to trap her in a cruel twist of fate. Wes felt his jaw tighten. He had seen enough of the world's cruelty to recognize when someone had been wronged, and everything about her condition screamed of injustice. The boulder pinning her leg was heavy but not immovable. He studied the angle, the pressure points, testing how deeply it had sunk. It would take strength, leverage, and her cooperation. When he told her as much, she nodded, refusing to show fear, though her breath hitched every time he touched the stone. Pressing his shoulder beneath its jagged edge, he strained with every muscle, his boots sliding in the dirt as he forced the rock upward. It budged only slightly, but Nayeli seized the moment. Pulling her leg free with a sharp gasp, she immediately tried to stifle. The boulder crashed back into place behind them, sending dust billowing. She leaned against the canyon wall, trying to stand despite the pain, and Wes reached out instinctively to steady her, but she brushed him off, not out of pride, but from the instinct of someone who had learned never to appear weak. Before he could say anything, her gaze shot upward, following the shape of a shadow crossing the ridge. "They're here," she whispered, and the tone of her voice told him she wasn't guessing. Wes's hand dropped to his revolver, his stance shifting automatically into a defensive posture, placing himself between her and the threat. The canyon suddenly felt like a trap, the walls too close, the exits too exposed. Nayeli insisted she could still move, though her leg shook beneath her, and with her arm slung over his shoulder they began inching toward a narrow path deeper into the canyon. Behind them, scattered gravel bounced down from above, signs of men descending with malicious intent. Wes knew they needed to escape quickly, but every few steps Nayeli winced, forcing him to carry more of her weight. Despite the pain, she remained alert, listening for footsteps, watching the rim, guiding him with quick whispers about where the canyon bent and where the bandits might ambush. Her courage was undeniable. Even wounded, even pursued, she carried herself like someone who refused to surrender. Wes had met warriors before, but something about her silent endurance, her refusal to break, struck him deeper than he expected. As they reached a narrow cut in the canyon wall where they could hide momentarily, Nayeli slid to the ground, clutching her leg as though trying to will the pain away. "You should leave me," she said through clenched teeth. Not as a plea, but as a practical suggestion. "They want me, not you." Wes crouched in front of her, his expression stern but calm. and told her bluntly that he wasn't the kind of man who turned his back on someone in need. Whether by chance or destiny, their paths had crossed, and he intended to see her through this. Nayeli stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of deceit or weakness, and whatever she saw there made her finally allow herself a moment of vulnerability, though only in the tiniest relaxation of her shoulders. Above them, a mocking whistle echoed down the canyon, followed by a voice calling her name in a taunting drawl, signaling the bandits were closing in. Wes checked his revolver, counting the bullets by touch, a habit he had acquired in darker times, and inhaled slowly as he prepared for the confrontation he knew was inevitable. Nayeli reached for his arm, not to stop him but to anchor herself, whispering that the man chasing her would not stop until she was dead, and if they wanted to survive, they would need to move soon. Wes nodded, his expression hardening with determination, and together they prepared to face whatever came next in the deadly quiet of the canyon. The narrow shelter in the canyon wall offered only a brief pause before the danger pressing down on them returned with greater force, and Wes knew every second spent hiding meant another second the bandits used to corner them. Helping Nayeli to her feet, he guided her deeper along the uneven ground, her weight leaning into him not by choice but necessity. Yet she remained alert, scanning the shifting shadows with warrior instincts, honed long before their paths crossed. Her injured leg made their progress painfully slow, but her spirit did not falter. She moved with a resolve that impressed Wes more than he expected, and as they reached a bend where the canyon widened slightly, he realized their only real chance lay in reaching the slope ahead that led toward open land. But the slope was exposed, a natural shooting gallery for anyone above. When he pointed this out, Nayeli didn't argue. She simply steadied her breathing and told him they had no choice. Behind them, the voices of the bandits drifted closer, boasting, cursing, calling her name with the venom of men who thought of cruelty as sport. One shot ricocheted off the canyon wall, sending splinters of rock raining down. Wes reacted instantly, pulling Nayeli behind a protruding boulder and returning fire with sharp precision, his bullets forcing the bandits to scatter temporarily. He could tell they were testing their position, assessing how injured their prey had become. Nayeli, despite her pain, kept her focus on the terrain, pointing out the narrow overhang where one bandit was likely attempting to edge closer. Wes adjusted his aim based on her whisper and fired, hearing the satisfying clatter of a weapon hitting stone above. But the brief victory did little to ease their situation. The attackers were too many, and Wes's ammunition was limited. As he reloaded, Nayeli confessed in quiet, clipped breaths that the bandits pursued her not only out of vengeance, but because they believed she carried knowledge of where her people had hidden the remaining sacred items. They assumed torturing her would give them answers, and her unwillingness to yield had only enraged their leader further. Wes listened without interrupting, understanding now that this was not a simple pursuit but a hunt fueled by greed, disrespect, and wounded pride. He told her they would reclaim what was stolen, and his voice carried a conviction he had not felt in years. Something about protecting her felt right, as if the canyon itself had led him there with purpose. With the gunfire paused for the moment, they pushed onward, reaching the exposed slope at last. Nayeli drew a long, pained breath and nodded to him, signaling she was ready. He supported her as they climbed. But halfway up, a shout rang out. One of the bandits had spotted them. Bullets tore into the dirt around their feet, and Wes shielded Nayeli with his body as they scrambled upward. She stumbled, her wounded leg buckling, and he caught her around the waist, hauling her upward with a strength born of desperation. Once they reached the higher ledge, they ducked behind a line of jagged rock formations. Nayeli clutched his arm tightly, her breathing ragged. But her eyes blazed with determination. She insisted they could not keep running forever and that the bandits would only grow bolder once they realized she was still alive. She urged Wes to think strategically, to use the canyon's layout against their pursuers. Her mind, even in pain, was sharp, and Wes found himself listening to her with the respect he would offer any seasoned fighter. She pointed to a cluster of boulders above the path the bandits would likely take and suggested that if they could trigger a small rock slide, it might buy them precious time, or even disable some of their pursuers. Wes admired her clarity under pressure. While she steadied herself against the rock, he climbed toward the unstable ledge she indicated. The effort was grueling, and several times he nearly lost his grip. But he reached the precarious formation and used the butt of his revolver to dislodge the right stones. The canyon trembled as a cascade of rocks crashed down the narrow trail, scattering the attackers and shouting erupting below. Nayeli used the chaos to reposition herself behind a more defensible outcrop, gripping a discarded rifle one of the bandits had dropped earlier. When Wes returned to her side, she handed him the weapon, insisting he needed it more than she did. Before he could argue, more footsteps approached. From the opposite direction, proof the bandits were splitting their forces. Wes positioned himself to block their approach, firing controlled shots, each one slowing the attacker's advance. Nayeli, though weakened, called out warnings, pointing to shifting shadows and helping him anticipate enemy movements. Their partnership, forged under fire, felt strangely natural, too. People from different worlds fighting with a unity, born from shared danger. As the sky deepened into the muted tones of approaching dusk, Wes realized the bandits were growing frustrated. Their taunts turned impatient, their movements reckless. With every passing minute, he and Nayeli pushed toward the canyon's exit, inch by inch, until the wide plains finally appeared ahead. When they emerged from the canyon's oppressive walls, Nayeli staggered but refused to fall, her gaze fixed on the horizon where her people traveled days earlier. She whispered that if they could reach her remaining kin, there was still hope, not just for her survival, but for retrieving the sacred items and restoring her people's honor. Wes nodded, adjusting his grip around her, knowing the journey ahead would be long and dangerous, but seeing no path he would rather take. Their escape from the canyon had not ended the threat, but it had forged something powerful between them: trust, resolve, and a shared goal that bound their fates as tightly as any promise ever could. And as they moved away from the canyon's deadly embrace, both understood that the true battle was only just beginning.